Good morning. For the first day in a long time. Don't feel like watching from the sidelines.
Welcome to the Core Conversations podcast by Ampelis, where our goal is to help you fuel, use, and rest your bodies in ways that unlock its innate abilities for physical and mental health. My name is Robbie Harmon, and I'll be your host. Welcome to another episode of Core Conversations. We're excited for the conversation we get to have today and for the guest we get to have today. Today's topic is the science of sleep and rest and how sleep impacts our metabolism, our physical health, our mental health, and all sorts of other things in our lives, how it's such an important part of really our health and well-being. So before I introduce our guests, we'll just say this. We talk a lot about sleep, nutrition, and movement or exercise. And this was really our first conversation in depth on the topic of sleep. So what we hope to convey, and I'll introduce Mark here in a minute, but we hope to convey this idea that sleep is not a luxury, that as essential as food and water, our sleep really is important for our health. It impacts our physical health. Not getting enough sleep can impair our cognitive functioning, increase risk of heart disease, stroke, other things. Getting enough sleep can improve our performance physically, athletically, mentally, etc. There's so many benefits. So to help us with this conversation, we have Mark Basil. Mark Basil I get to know Mark on a number of different ways, but he's my next door neighbor as of a year ago, which is a great thing for my family. Maybe not so good for his, but great thing for my family. I first got to know you at, I think our Bree and Megan's soccer games. Our daughters played soccer together when we first moved to Utah. And subsequently, we've had Mark, who's the owner of Optimum Fitness. He's an exercise physiologist, but he's just developed a wealth of knowledge and practical experience helping people with all sorts of physical and mental health issues. And we've engaged Mark in a number of ways. He's helped us with patients in an addiction recovery program that we operated, where he would help people with all sorts of things, whether it was pain or sleep or other nutritional things. And since have referred a lot of people to see Mark, including my own children, when they're dealing with problems that doctors seem to have a hard time diagnosing or fixing. Mark seems to somehow get right to the root cause of the issue and give us the right things to do to make it better. So grateful that we get to have you help us with this conversation today. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah. So far, you haven't had to say anything, so naturally. Okay, so let's just start with your background. Tell us, I didn't do justice to your background, but just help people who are listening understand who you are and what your career journey has been and how you kind of developed some of the expertise that you have.
Yeah. So technically I'm a clinical exercise physiologist, but I say that just sounds cool. I did lots of years of schooling, and that taught me one thing, which is keep learning. So I try to travel and learn from the best in the world on everything from knees, back, shoulders, hips, or sleep, nutrition, exercise, breathing. And so that takes me just around the country. So I'll be in Bethesda, Maryland. I'll be in Mountainside, New Jersey. I'll be in Waldoboro, Maine, which is in the middle of nowhere. I'll be in Providence, Rhode Island, Warwick. I'll be in San Diego, Portland, Oregon, Austin, Texas. Keep Austin weird. Just trying to learn. And with that said, if I study this till the day I die, I might know 2% of all there is to know about the human body. So if anybody thinks they have it all figured out, run away. We're just trying to understand this amazing thing we call the body.
Well, it is amazing. And I'm always impressed by how much you retain from these things that you go to. And I've seen glimpses of some of your infinitely maybe expanding PowerPoint decks where you've got all this repository of slides and knowledge from these things that you go to, but it's just impressive. You do a remarkable job at somehow retaining that, and consequently you're so helpful. I mean, it's somebody once asked me, they were talking about having a problem. I was telling them about you, and they asked, what's his background? I said, well, he's just kind of a wizard. He knows all things and magically can help you with any of these things, whether it's your shoulder pain or you're having a hard time sleeping. He's got knowledge. And so grateful for that, and grateful that we have you as a resource. I'll just say this. I know people fly in to see you in Alpine, Utah, small town Alpine, from all over the country just because you help them get results. So I know you're humble and you don't want to like, pat yourself on the back for all this stuff, but I think it's relevant because I want everybody to know the credibility through practical application that with which you're approaching this conversation. So.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Now you can pay me for the commercial. So let's start with this. Just perhaps the most fundamental question on this topic of sleep. So why is it important? What's happening physiologically when we sleep? And why does it matter? So if we can set that foundation, I think we'll launch into a number of interesting conversations on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's like almost what doesn't it do? So sleep increases your energy levels. It helps with mood. So anxiety and depression, we know that in over 30% of all cases of depression, they're preceded by lack of sleep. And in over 70% of all cases of anxiety, they're preceded by lack of sleep. So it's one of the best predictors we have for anxiety and depression. We know it helps with testosterone improvement. I spoke recently to a high school football team.
My son's football team, because he told me about it.
Yeah. Your son's. And, they didn't want to hear about how it helps with all these other things. So I had to cut right to the chase. Hey, this helps with testosterone, right? And they're like, oh, okay, that's important for football, right? It helps with cravings, right? So a lot of times people look for sugar or caffeine to give them energy that they didn't get from sleeping. So it's huge. In terms of addiction, in terms of neuroplasticity, so in order to break a bad habit or an addiction, your brain has to be plastic. So when you break a bad habit or an addiction, your brain changes physically and physiologically it changes. So it's very, very difficult, nearly impossible to break an addiction without adequate sleep. When we don't get enough sleep, the first part of our brain that shrinks is our prefrontal cortex. That's right here. So when that shrinks, you might keep your math skills, but your emotional IQ, your relationships will suffer, right? So sometimes, we say something to our spouse and they go, rah, 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 and we go, whoa, did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, right? What we mean to say is you didn't get enough sleep or enough good quality sleep. Right. So it helps with removal of beta amyloids, right? We've heard these plaques that cause dementia and Alzheimer's. You clear those at night when you sleep at about a 10-fold rate. So it's orders of magnitude compared to waking. So it's called the lymphatic system, and it kind of is like the lymphatic system, but for your brain. So it detoxes heavy metals, it detoxes toxins, cellular debris, right? So it decreases your rates of every disease and infirmity on the planet. I don't want to make it sound like a panacea, but it kind of is. There was a study that was done during COVID, which is interesting. And they took healthcare professionals that were first line treatment responders, right? They're in the hospitals. And they found that if they decreased their sleep by just 1 hour, so if they got 1 hour less of sleep, it increased their rates of getting COVID by about 23%, which is significant, right? I mean, these are people that are high risk and all of a sudden 23% more likely to get it just by decreasing their sleep by 1 hour.
Wow.
The consolidation of memory, which we'll look at down the road, that happens at night when you sleep. Recovery, right? People always want to be like, oh, recovery, this is a buzzword right now. Recovery, what are you doing for recovery? It's like sleep works better than any therapy, any modality, any sauna, cryotherapy, cold plunge. Give me your best laser, class 3, class 4 laser. It works better than all that. And again, orders of magnitudes better, way better. Like it's not even, it doesn't hold a candle to the benefits and power of sleep. So there's just nothing it doesn't really dramatically affect. If you look at studies on centenarians, there's been multiple studies on this. One of the characteristics of centenarians is they tend to sleep longer. And it's significantly longer, hour and a half longer sleep. On average. And they don't just start doing this when they turn 100. They're doing this their whole lives, right? They're sleeping more and sleeping better. The Okinawans, the longest lived people in the world, they tend to sleep more, and they sleep better, And so we just don't practice a lot of this, especially in the United States, like we should. We're up, we're late, we're on our phones, doing other things.
So it's this sleep is this resource is the wrong word, but for lack of a better word, it's this resource that's available to all of us to really, I can't even, that list, right? That you just, to supercharge our lived experience in so many ways, prolong life, improve health, improve memory and cognitive function, etc. Like it's this thing that's available to all of us. We don't have to spend a bunch of money trying to go get it. And so let's go there. Like, so I guess the question then becomes like, how much do we need? How do we optimize it? All those things. Let's maybe launch into that now. So tell us maybe first, if you can, before we do that, actually, I want to break down the sleep cycle, because I know there are different parts of the sleep cycle and they do different things and they start at different phases, and so maybe could you break that down a little bit for us and tell us what those cycles are, parts of the sleep cycle, and what they do?
Yeah, great question. So there's 4 stages of sleep. You've got stage 1 sleep, stage 2, stage 3, and that's what's known as REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And so the first stage of sleep, your N1, this is your transitory sleep. This is your gateway. You're getting ready to go to bed. You're laying in bed. You're not quite asleep yet. You're just kind of still there. That's your first stage. That's there's no necessarily recovery or restoration there, but this is just your falling asleep, right? Then you get stage 2 sleep. This is your very light sleep. This is when your blood pressure starts to drop. This is when your heart rate starts to drop. You can still be awoken pretty easily, right, if somebody comes in, but you're in a light phase of sleep. Your body's doing a little bit of work for the memory at this point. So you're doing a little memory work in this light stage. This comprises about 50% of our sleep. So 50% is light sleep. Then we go to stage 3 sleep, or N3 sleep, and that's where you're getting into the deep sleep. Sometimes we call it delta sleep or slow wave sleep. This is when we're really sound asleep. It'd be hard to wake you in a stage 3 sleep. And this is where our body does some healing of the muscles and the tendons and the bones in our physical body. It also does some procedural declarative memory consolidation. So it takes facts that you learn during the day and it puts those into longer term storage. It takes vocabulary, puts it into that longer term storage. Again, this is when our blood pressure drops even more. So we're really in a deep sleep. Heart rate drops even more. This is the lowest usually for the entire night, is in our deep sleep. Comprises 20 up to 25, sometimes up to 30% of our sleep, depending on where you are in the sleep cycle and how your sleep was the several days before. And lastly, we have REM sleep. This is the rapid eye movement sleep. This is when our body really takes things from short-term storage and puts it into long-term storage. This is when we dream. This is when we're paralyzed so we don't act out our dreams. This is a lot of healing happens here. This is where the procedural memory happens. So our ability to get dressed. We had a client in today whose mother is in a nursing home and she's 92, and they have to dress her and they have to, right? So she's forgot how to do these kind of procedural type activities. And so this happens again in that stage 4. So each of these stages has kind of a benefit to it, right? You can't get into deep sleep unless you start with N1 sleep, where you're starting to fall asleep, right? So they're all beneficial. Each of these cycles, you go through each of these cycles about every 60, 90 minutes, closer to 90 minutes for most people. So you go through it 90 minutes, and then you get another 90 minutes and another 90 minutes. You get roughly 4 to 6 90-minute bouts, which puts you at around the right time in terms of sleep that you need for a night. You get more REM sleep, though, those last 2 hours of sleep, that last 90-minute or 120-minute segment. That's when you get a lot of the REM sleep, which then helps with all that restorative, memory, long-term memory, procedural memory, and a lot of hormones as well. And we'll look at some of the things that might affect those stages down the road. But
yeah, I'm eager to go there and talk about levers you can pull that can optimize, your experience in each of those 4 stages, or particularly the deep sleep and the REM sleep. But let's start with how much sleep we actually need, because if we go through these cycles, there's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about on this basic question of how much do we actually need. And we could talk about it by age, we could talk about it by other criteria, but let's just start with that basic question. How much sleep do we need, and how does it differ with age groups?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of sleep for adults, so we're talking adults, and there's 2 different criteria, and I like the National Sleep Foundation's criteria. I think they actually have a young adult phase in there, which I think contributes to a lot of problems if you don't look at that.
This is like an 18 to 29.
18 to 23, 26, depending on the individuals. But what we're looking at is ideally we want 7 to 9 hours a night per individual, preferably 8 to 9, and 9 to 10 is allowable. So if you're going through a stressful situation, you're fighting off a disease or infection, your in-laws come to live with you, stuff like that. So that was a joke. So, if you're going through COVID, if you're, you want more sleep. So a lot of times we think, okay, what's the bare minimum? Like we're always about the bare minimum.
Right.
Okay, I want to get 7, but ideally 8 or 9. And again, 9 to 10 is allowable. Right. For teenagers, they need, so you're 13 to 17-year-olds, right? 8 to 10, preferably 9 to 10, 10 to 11 is allowable. 10 to 11, right? So, sometimes the first thing people think when something's happening is like, oh, well, so-and-so's depressed. Let's get them on something. It's like, well, how's their sleep? Well, let's bump that up from, 8 hours to 9 hours, or 9 hours to 10 hours, or 10 hours to 11 hours before we kind of go a different route. So it's an easy thing to do kind of day one. And then you've got these young adults, which again, their time frame is also higher. It's 8 to 10, preferably 9 to 10, 10 to 11 is allowable. So even young adults can benefit from this higher sleep amount. And again, it's something that we tend to write off and say, oh no, I'm not going to do that. The other thing that I want to bring up with this, and it's often overlooked. So people say, I went to bed at 10 o'clock, I got up at 7, I got my 9 hours, but that's not how it works. So you go to bed at 7, and remember that time when you're kind of falling asleep a little bit? Yeah, that's that sleep latency till you fall asleep. That might be several minutes, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes for some people. And then you woke up at night to go to the bathroom, and then you came back and maybe it took you several minutes to fall asleep. And then your alarm went off and you hit the alarm and you stayed in bed another 10 minutes. Well, you're saying, yeah, I went from this time to this time. It's like, no. So
less an hour.
Plus an hour. So a lot of times you're looking at 30 minutes up to an hour and a half added on to whatever time you were in bed versus the actual time that you were sleeping. So if you're in bed for, 10 hours, you might get 9 hours of sleep. If you're really good, your sleep efficiency is really good. You fell asleep as soon as your head hit the pillow. You didn't wake up until the morning. Okay, maybe it's less, but there's still going to be some sleep latency. There's going to be some time that's not accounted for with that. And that plays a major role in this. So if you're in bed for 9 hours, again, plan on counting it for less time. And there's ways you can actually monitor this, but that's the idea.
Is there variability by person? So there's the guidance of 7 to 9 hours for an adult, but are some people fine with 7, but some people need 9? And how does that work?
Yeah. So, there's so many variables. So, again, any sort of chronic illness will predispose you to needing more sleep, right? If somebody's got Epstein-Barr or Lyme's or Hashimoto's, right? They're going to need more sleep. Somebody's got long COVID, right? They're going to need more sleep. If somebody's under a lot of stress at work or personally, they're going to need more sleep, And so with those individuals, plan on more sleep. There are some people that can get by with kind of the bare minimum 7. Everybody likes to think that that's them, and it's usually not. It's maybe 4 or 5% of the population that can get by with just the bare bones minimum. And most people need more in the middle or upper range. And they've done studies on this. People will say, oh, I only need 6 hours a night or 7 hours a night. And they'll put people in an actual environment that's dark and quiet, and they have them sleep, and they wake up. See, I only needed 6 hours. Like, you just slept 8 hours and 45 minutes. So.
Well, that was going to be my question. So how does somebody know? Because we know the guidance, I've heard the guidance for a long time, but we're in that range. Sometimes I get less, sometimes I get more, but what do I need versus what do I want is a question. Cause I feel so refreshed. If I get a solid 8 hours, that's like, I'm feeling great. But sometimes you get 7, but how do you know what you really need?
So a good way to determine this is we'd say you want to do what we call the sleep hygiene. So there's kind of 7 big rocks for sleep. You would do those 7 key things. In addition to that, you go to bed at the same time, and then you don't set an alarm. So you don't set an alarm. And whenever you wake up after about 2 weeks of doing this, that's when you need to wake up.
Gives you your standard.
Programmed your body. That's your standard, right? Because you wouldn't do it just for a day or two because of habit, right? You're going to Pavlov's law. You're going to wake up at that same time that you've been waking up. But when you don't set an alarm after 2 weeks of doing that, that's how much sleep you need, at least for the next foreseeable future. And you might do this every year or every year and a half to see, have my needs changed? And that's beneficial because once you know how much sleep you need, then if you're traveling or if you go to bed earlier or a little bit later, you can kind of shift it and still say, hey, I'm trying to get this amount of sleep, right? And that's where the 7 keys for sleep come in.
Well, can we put a whole...
That's what I was going to say. Let's wait on that.
I want to come to that though.
Yeah.
One more question on just amount of sleep before we do. I've often heard, as whether it's my parents or grandparents, they get older, you hear this idea that older people don't need as much sleep as they did when they were younger. Is that a truth or is that a falsehood?
It's kind of a falsehood. So what it is they need just about the same amount of sleep. It's just they have a harder time getting the sleep. And so it's like, yes, we want them to be in bed and trying to, if you're in bed, you're getting rest. You might not be getting sleep, but you're getting rest. So we still want them to try to sleep, even if they're in light sleep, even if the quality isn't the same, you still want to get more sleep. They have made an exception saying, hey, you might be able to go a little lower on your sleep range, but ideally still that 7 to 9 hours is ideal.
Makes sense.
So,
so you mentioned, travel and other things that can sometimes throw your sleep schedule off. Weekends do the same thing, as parents with kids who are teenagers. Sometimes you're waiting up for your kids on the weekends, or they stay out later on the weekends, and then you get up early because you still have stuff to do on Saturday. And so you kind of get backlogged, and there's this idea of sleep debt. Maybe could you talk to us about that? Can you catch up on sleep? What is sleep debt? And can you really make up for it with more sleep a subsequent day?
Yeah. So sleep debt is it's kind of the delta or the difference between what you actually need and then what you actually obtained or achieved. Right. So if you needed 8 hours and you got 7 hours and 30 minutes, you're in a 30-minute sleep debt. And usually to really recover, it takes several days. So if you're short for 5 days, trying to make up on the weekend really doesn't cut it. You need several days. And, what's interesting is in an ideal world, they get, 5 good days and then they want to be out late on the weekend. So that's 2 days that aren't good, which is, roughly 30%, So ideally we would say, you know what, let's try to dial it in during the week for sure. But also on that weekend, maybe we have kind of a medium night out instead of 2 late night outs. Sometimes you can sleep in a little bit, but it really just doesn't fix the problem because it's a day-to-day issue, right? My hormones are going to be off the days I don't sleep well, and I can't make up that difference, right? So you can't just sleep in on the weekends and expect it to all be good. Better than not, but not ideal.
Given the variability that is just naturally a part of life, is there an optimal time for everybody to sleep? Like, is earlier better? Does it change with the seasons and light patterns? But talk about that if you would. What's the science there with the optimal window of sleep?
So a couple things there. One of them is ideally we wouldn't have a daylight savings time, but that's a whole other story, right? Your congressman or woman, right? Try to get that squared away.
Or move to Arizona.
Yeah. There we go. Somebody who's not observing. Right? But what ends up happening is this. Ideally, you've probably heard the quality this side of midnight is more important than the other side, which is true.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the early to bed, early to rise. It's literally a proverb. So ideally, we would go to bed earlier, 9, 9:30, 10. We say 10:30 is the latest. That's one of our kind of 7 big rocks is don't go to bed later than 10:30.
And why is that?
So if you stay awake later than 10:30, you kind of get a second wind. Right. So your cortisol levels say, oh, hey, we're going to pull an all-nighter, it looks like, and it releases cortisol. Ramps up, and that inhibits melatonin. It affects the body's natural sleep cycles, so the circadian rhythm, that 24 hours. So that's one thing. Now, I will say teenagers will say, hey, aren't our circadian rhythms shifted back? Yes, they are. They 100% are. So instead of going to bed at 9 or 9:30 or 10, it's probably better for them to go to bed at 10 or 10:30 or 11, and maybe even 11:30. The problem is there's a hard stop the next day, and it's called school, right? And write your congressman or woman about that. So there's just that hard stop. And so if you're looking at these teenagers and say, okay, they need 8 to 10 hours a night, let's just pick the middle, 9 hours. So if they go to bed at 10 and they get up at 6:30, that's 8.5 hours of time in bed, but not sleep. So that might be 8 hours of sleep when really they should be getting 9. So it would be nice if we can push it back. In Washington State, in various different districts, they had actually pushed the start time back by 50 minutes, which when they figured it, that allotted for about an extra 30 minutes of sleep. So they didn't fully take advantage of it, but 30 minutes extra of sleep by starting 50 minutes later. What happened? Less expulsions, less truancies, less tardiness, and the standard deviation for the school's GPA went up by approximately half a standard deviation. So if they were averaging a B- as a school as their cumulative GPA, it went to a B. I mean, that's huge, right? Just by starting a little bit later, less than 1 hour later. But again, you gotta write somebody for that. Talk to the principal, talk to the superintendents there.
It is so interesting because you hear stuff like that, and you hear stuff about rulings in court. Judges are more harsh with the rulings. You hear stuff about traffic accidents and so forth on the day after the change in times, the daylight savings, when people have an hour less sleep. There's all these interesting patterns that start to emerge, and you hear stuff like that, and you're like, why are we not addressing some of this? But it's really hard when you're trying to change the whole system of functioning in a society, whether it's school start times or clocks and that they have changing because of energy usage patterns that they thought they would want to save more money with changing times and all these things. It's hard to do. Maybe, to your point of your continued prompt there, write your local congressman.
It's part of this was, hey, we can golf longer, right?
Yeah.
Part of this is, hey, maybe we don't have to use as much artificial light. The problem is you end up changing the way the body works naturally. Right. And so you can't override thousands of years of programming and how we used to be versus how it is now. And this is one of the problems with our artificial light even now.
There's consequences of it. Okay. Well, it's interesting. That daylight savings thing, I know there's a movement. There actually is. It seems like some energy behind that idea. At least there was recently. I don't know if it's got traction or not, but
it's still there. I know in Utah, there's several other states that have to agree before we can do it. But yeah, I mean, the most dangerous days are always the days after you have the time changes. So your daylight savings, it's dangerous to be on the road.
So teenagers, you talked about this. You mentioned that their circadian rhythm shifts in their teenage years, naturally wanting to fall asleep later, which by extension means that they want to sleep in, or they need to sleep in a little bit later, and sometimes they can't. Like maybe napping, like what strategies can you have because that basically we're saying that there are constraints that prevent them from getting enough sleep. And that leads to all sorts of challenges that we're seeing maybe with some of the mental health stuff and other things. So what are some strategies, particularly for teenagers with those constraints and that shift in their circadian rhythm, that they can use to try to combat the negative or harmful impacts of not getting enough sleep?
Yeah, that's a great question. And especially as it relates to teenagers now and today with everything that's going on. One of them is we have people like in the afternoon or when they get home from school, try to lay out all your clothes for the next day, right? Sometimes for people that can take, 20 or 30 minutes, like, oh, what do I like this one? This one. Just lay it out the night before. That's going to save you 15 or 20 minutes in the morning picking out an outfit, right? The other thing is sometimes we'll have people shower in the evening, right? And there's actually some benefits to showering late at night where you get a cool down effect. Now, not right before you go to bed. So if you're going to bed at 10:30, maybe you shower around 8:30 or 9. Then you get what's called a cool down effect. Actually helps you sleep better. So now I don't have to wake up and shower. My clothes are already laid out for me. Having a simple breakfast, right? So maybe you do like overnight oats, right? It's already ready. You pull it out of the freezer or out of the thermos or whatever you have it in, and then you just put some blueberries and raspberries and you're good. Rather than trying to like cook some food from scratch, that can be helpful. So now I saved another 15 minutes on this side of it, you know, or 10 minutes. So instead of having to get up, at 6:30, maybe we can now get up at 6:50 or 6:55 or, depending on when your school starts. So we can save some time that way. And then also the quality of preparing yourself to go to sleep. So maybe I can't get quite as much sleep overall because I have a hard stop the next day, but I can do these things, get a little bit more time. But also if I avoid the bright lights 3 hours before I go to bed, I'm going to have better quality sleep. So I might not need as much quantity. So anything you can do to affect those variables, your quality or quantity, is going to make a huge impact for a teenager.
Yeah, that's helpful. Those are practical tips to just increase the efficiency that you're using your time with before and after you wake up so you can get more sleep, which is a great way to think about that because as we said, you can't necessarily change the amount of time that you have to get that sleep. So what can you do to on the back end like create a little bit of buffer so you can just extend it by eliminating things that have to happen before or after. That's a good way of thinking about it. Maybe napping, like teenagers, is it too late when they get home from schools, call it at 3:00, 3:30? Is that too late in the afternoon for them to nap?
It's not too late, but it's definitely not ideal. Ideally, you'd want to be doing that 1:30, 2:00, kind of at the latest,
Yeah.
for an ideal scenario. When you sleep later, you still get sleep. It's not quite the same quality, but the problem is it decreases sleep drive, which is your drive to want to go to bed. So we've all had this happen, right? You do that late Saturday or late Sunday evening nap, and then you're like, I'm not sleepy. I'm struggling falling asleep. I don't feel that drive. So I would say if you're going to do a sleep nap, you can, but make it like 20, 30 minutes tops, but ideally closer to 20 minutes. I wouldn't do a long hour and a half nap that late afternoon, because it'll affect your sleep drive dramatically and you're probably not going to sleep. And so, sorry, teenagers, the world was built for the adults and, you're just living in it, so.
Let's go to, you mentioned at the beginning, some, 70% of people that are dealing with anxiety aren't getting enough sleep, or 30% with depression. Can you say more about that? What is what data exists about causation and correlation, maybe both, as it pertains to some of the mental health issues in sleep?
Yeah. So what we know is during those stage 3 and stage 4 sleep, that's when our body really replenishes 2 key hormones. One's called serotonin, and then it was dopamine. So serotonin is kind of the happiness hormone. You look outside and you're like, oh, it's a beautiful day. That's serotonin you're experiencing. And serotonin kind of gives you a longer fuse. So if you don't get enough serotonin, you get a little shorter fuse, a little short with people, a little testy, right? Dopamine is more the excitement, the thrill hormone, right? It's like, woo, right. We're excited, right? And when you look at the research on this, so the SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Paxil, Prozac, Celexa, Zoloft,
all your antidepressants,
all your classical antidepressants, those increase serotonin by about 10%, kind of the net versus the gross, right? You get a 10% overall net increase in serotonin. When you sleep, you get 15 to 20% increase in serotonin and dopamine in those same hormones, serotonin and dopamine.
If you get a full cycle,
full night's sleep. So it works so well for increasing serotonin and dopamine. And so some people would say, correlation causation, right? So I'm not sleeping well because I'm worried about something and that's why I'm depressed, but is it I'm worrying about something that's why I'm not sleeping? Or so they've done studies on this, especially pre-1980 when things were a little bit looser. They would put people in these different scenarios where they would sleep deprive them. And sure enough, the sleep deprivation in and of itself alone, with regards to everything else being the same, everything constant, increases your rates for depression and anxiety. So the sleep by itself is an independent factor for anxiety and depression. And some of the original experiments, they would take people and they would deprive them of sleep, and then they would have them do things that they normally wouldn't do, right? Things that were maybe immoral or unethical. And because their willpower was down, their ability to resist temptation, their ability to stick to something, stick-to-itiveness was down, they would succumb to these temptations or these pressures of other people. So getting that sleep, again, it fortifies our drive, our willpower, our ability to stick to something. So whether that's a diet, whether that's a lifestyle behavior change, getting sleep helps with everything.
If you I asked our last guest the same question because we were talking about exercise and how important exercise is, and movement. And sometimes in my life anyway, I've had to choose. It's like, man, I had to stay up really late doing that project, and it's been a week and I've had to stay up late every night. What's more important? Is it more important for me to sleep in an extra 45 minutes or an hour, or is it to get up and do my normal exercise routine? And which has more benefit? Is there any relative, is there data on the relative benefits of sleep versus exercise?
Yeah. So what I would say here, and I know people that are in both camps, as I call it, I would say the sleep is more important
Mm.
in terms of overall. And there's a lot of reasons why we can look at, but I would say the sleep is more important overall. Now, if your choices actually do come down to sleep or exercise, and that happens on a regular basis, you might want to look at your lifestyle.
Other
because you
things,
probably
yeah.
want to adjust that accordingly, because that shouldn't have to be the top two that have to
Make
go.
those trade-offs. You need both of them.
You need both of them,
Yeah.
right? But the other thing is when you get that good quality sleep, you lower your blood pressure, and we actually know you lower your cholesterol. This wasn't known until recently. They always knew it lowered blood pressure, but it actually lowers cholesterol as well.
Mm.
And the other thing is it gives you more energy to do other things during the day. So you might not exercise formally structured exercise activity, but you might do something else, right? I'm going to go on a brisk walk at lunchtime because I have a little bit more energy. I got my good sleep, things like that. And just the activities of daily living, higher quality, more activity, you're more likely to do that when you get enough sleep.
Okay, so we've talked about the optimal amount of sleep for different ages. We've talked about the ideal sleep window, starting earlier, 10:30 at the latest, maybe as a rule. Obviously there's going to be exceptions, but making that like the ceiling for us in our regular life. And we've talked about the relationship or the causal nature of sleep and some mental health issues. Some of the things that get in the way, obviously, when we think about getting to sleep on time or quality of sleep, and how we see the relationship between social media use, technology use, and depression rates. I've often thought, how much of it is because of the actual usage and how much of it is because of this impact on sleep. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on that relationship between technology use? And I know this could go a bunch of ways, but technology use, how does that impact sleep? When should you shut it off? All of those things.
Yeah. So there's kind of a double whammy with the device using. One of them is you get the blue light, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we know
what does that do? Yeah.
So flickering light stimulate in our body cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which kind of keeps you awake. Also, what stimulates melatonin, the sleepy hormone, technically it's a cooling hormone that induces sleep. But anyway, what stimulates melatonin is darkness. So if I'm on my device, that's light, which stimulates cortisol. And if I'm on my device, it's not dark, it's blue light. And we used to have the old school, the original OG Apple iPhone, right? It didn't have a lot of blue light, but now we've got these blue light phones that have more blue light, right? These LEDs. And it's great for noon and horrible at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. So there's a certain spectrum of light, which is called blue light, in essence, the color blue that keeps us awake. So what is it about blue light? So way back in the day, if you looked up and you saw blue, that was the sky and you should be awake. Way back in the day, if you looked out and you saw the ocean, that's blue and you should be awake. So the color blue in particular stimulates us to be awake. So we have these new LEDs, these new phones, these TVs with more LEDs, and it makes us want to be awake. So it inhibits melatonin and it increases cortisol. It's the exact opposite of what we want. So again, great at noon, horrible at 10 p.m. So that in and of itself affects your sleep quality, but also it stimulates the brain, right? You're getting a dopamine hit. It's exciting. You're like, oh, right? So it's a double whammy. If you're reading like the, owner's manual to your vacuum cleaner or to your refrigerator
It's
on
not
it,
very exciting.
That would be better, but you probably don't want to do that. So ideally we would say try to avoid the bright lights, phones, TVs, tablets, 3 hours before you go to bed. That's in an ideal world. Now, if you said, Mark, I can't do 3 hours before I go to bed, I can only do an hour and a half. Well, that's better than 5 minutes. That's better than being in bed on your phone. So any movement, so it's not all or nothing. It's not, black or white. Any movement along this continuum is going to yield some significant results. So if we can get you to 3 hours, great. If not 2, if not 1, whatever you can do.
So what about, you mentioned, I'm just trying to stay on this theme of practical application for people who are listening or parents who are listening and have teenagers who are trying to help. One of them is start to help them wean off technology. I think that's not a novel thought. We've heard that a lot, in recent years. You mentioned showering, and you made a brief comment about cooling of a shower. When I first heard that, I'm like, okay, I need to take a cold shower and somehow that's going to cool my body down, which will help me fall asleep. But it's actually the opposite. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So what happens is when you take a hot shower, your body temperature goes up, but then it has kind of this negative feedback loop where it actually drops lower than baseline. And when the when the temperature goes up and then drops below, now that's the ideal environment to go to bed. So cool goes with sleep, heat goes with awake. So you wouldn't want to take the hot shower and then immediately try to go to bed, because that cooling down effect might not happen for several hours. Right. And now all of a sudden, 2 hours later, you're like, I'm finally going to bed. So ideally an hour to 2 hours before, ideally closer an hour and a half to 2 hours before, helps. We see a similar benefit to exercise. You want to exercise even a little bit earlier because of the cortisol response. But the ideal time to exercise, if we're talking about for the additional benefit of the cool down response, would be 4:30 to 5:30 in the late afternoon, early evening.
Even that superior for sleep, impact on sleep, that's better than even in the morning.
Better than in the morning. Definitely
Really?
better. Yeah. So you get benefits for sleep no matter when you exercise. But when you exercise at that 4:30 to 5:30, you're
Ramping up your
body temperature, and then it drops below baseline by about 10 to 10:30. So again, that's assuming you're going to bed at 10 to 10:30. If you're going back to bed at 11 or 11:30, you just shift that window back.
So, okay. So interesting. So, warm shower, not cold shower at night.
Warm shower.
And that would ideally happen several hours or an hour at least before bed.
Yep.
And exercise, optimal impact on sleep would be in the afternoon, kind of late afternoon, but not into the evening.
No.
Because your body hasn't fully gotten down and cooled down. Okay.
That's exactly it. And, when you exercise, your body takes ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, this molecule, and breaks it into ADP. And that extra adenosine is the raw material for melatonin. So you get the benefit of exercising, again, whether it's in the morning, afternoon, or whenever, but you get the additional benefit with the cool down response. And it is powerful. Like, people don't realize when they exercise at that time, if you can dial in that window, you're golden. But don't exercise too late. Like, if you exercise right before you go to bed, it will keep you up for hours.
Yeah.
For most people.
Okay. And you're not making the suggestion that everybody should exercise in the afternoon, because you're saying in isolation of all of the variables, if we could just control this one thing to optimize sleep, it would be then recognizing there's all sorts of benefits for exercising anytime and lifestyle implications and whatever that might require you to do it in the morning. And that's still a really good thing and helps your sleep.
Amen. So usually what I say is the best time to exercise is whenever you can do it on a regular basis, right? Yeah. So if I can hit 6 out of 7 days a week at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. or 6 a.m., then do that, right? If I'm only getting twice a week at 6 p.m., then don't do that, but 4:30 to 5:30, in some situations it can happen. Maybe with teenagers, they're out of school. For working adults, maybe that's a little harder. If you're retired, you could probably do that. So.
Okay, let's go to some other common sleep aids or strategies that people use, whether for themselves or for their kids. Like I'm thinking of times when maybe we've gone on a long flight with a baby and like, maybe I should give my baby some melatonin so they're not crying the whole time. I'm not saying we did that, but I know that was a thought I had. But people talk about things like that, like melatonin, mouth taping, Ambien, Benadryl, nasal strips, eye mask, white noise. I'd love to hit like one by one, hit those and just talk about, do they work? How and if they should be used? What caution should we have with each of them? So maybe can we just go down this list and get your opinions? So how about melatonin?
Yeah. So no sleep organization recommends melatonin, none.
Interesting.
So
where did that come from then? Because that's this thing that everybody says, oh, if you need to sleep better, take melatonin. It's a natural thing. And
so in the US, it was allowed. In other countries, like in Europe, melatonin is prescription medication.
Oh,
so if
interesting.
you wanted to get melatonin, you would go to your physician, get a script for it, and then fill it, right? So it's a hormone, and usually you're not allowed to have hormones, but there's an exception for melatonin. But no sleep organization recommends it. It's contraindicated, prohibited if you're under 18. The AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they provide all the recommendations for children. And again, it's not recommended. It's contraindicated with very few exceptions. If somebody has some sort of kind of a schizo effect or something like that, where they might need something to actually fall asleep at all, but it's not recommended. The CDC does not recommend it. So what we know is if you're young, first of all, melatonin only helps you fall asleep and it doesn't help you stay asleep. So if your issue is staying asleep, melatonin doesn't help. It also causes vivid nightmares, what they call night terrors. And so it's not recommended for that. If you're under 18, well, any age, but especially under 18, it's significant because it lowers sex hormones, specifically testosterone and DHEA. So if somebody's taking it and they're younger, right, this can lead to, in young boys, it can lead to demasculinization, and in females, early menarche, going through puberty earlier, which is associated with every negative thing you can think of. So we're not a real big fan of giving melatonin. It's known as the anti-gonad hormone. So some of the original versions of chemical castration for prisoners was high doses of melatonin.
Oh, wow.
So ideally, we don't like giving melatonin out really at all. Also, a dose your body would produce would be about 1 milligram. What do you usually see in the source? 3, 5, 8, 10. So if I need 1 and I take 10, 9 go to decrease my own sex hormones.
Jeez.
Right? I mean, again, you're shooting yourself in your foot, literally, in terms of this, especially if you're an athlete, right? I'm decreasing my most potent hormone for performance.
For performance and motivation. Yeah. Well, that's I mean, so that's a pretty serious one. It sounds like maybe one that we've not gotten right as a society in terms of recognizing some of the negative implications of using this thing that we've maybe passed around pretty lightly, even with babies on airplanes,
Yeah. I mean, really the time when you would use it is if you're an adult and you're going through, we'll look at this. Even then, if you're going through, time zones, right? You're doing some time travel, you're going to a different state or a different country, maybe 1 milligram then would be appropriate. But even then, you got things like valerian root, which is a better alternative. It's non-habit forming. It's not addicting. It's not a hormone. It helps you fall asleep and stay asleep, right? And doesn't cause those vivid nightmares.
So there's alternatives. Valerian root. Okay, so probably avoid melatonin with few rare exceptions.
Yeah.
I know there were some other reasons during COVID era where there were some protocols where melatonin was helpful because it suppressed the activity of your immune system or whatever else. But in most cases, let's avoid melatonin.
Amen.
For sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. How about mouth tape?
Yeah. So mouth tape, so it makes it so you don't breathe through your mouth. So you breathe through your nose, ideally. Now, if somebody has a deviated septum and they don't really breathe through their nose, this is going to be torture, right? They're just going to be waking up every 5 minutes and going, okay, I'm done with this, right? So mouth tape can be very beneficial. I would say this, I'm a big fan of like the light elastic tape. So
like
Kinesio tape, KT tape, Spire tape, Strength tape, Rock tape, OK tape, any of these light elastics, and just putting that across your mouth, and they're breathable, which is really nice. KT tape is probably the most breathable of all the different light elastic tapes. So you can put that on, and then it can help with snoring. It can help with getting more oxygen if you're breathing through your nose. Again, assuming you're not having, if you're all congested in your nasal passages because of, being sick, or you have a lot of dairy and you're inflamed in there, the mouth tape's not going to help a ton. But normally, in normal circumstances, it's beneficial.
So I've tried this one, and this one has helped me. I don't like that I snored, but I learned like a couple years ago, probably 2 years ago, that I snored sometimes. And I didn't want to admit that I was a snorer because I wasn't overweight or anything. I didn't like it, but I used, and I just put a strip, like a little tiny strip, like right here. I didn't go across. I just went right here. And for a couple weeks, and it took me maybe 2 nights to get used to having it on my mouth. But then after that, it was totally normal. Didn't ever interrupt my sleep. And after a couple of weeks, I could take it off, and it was like my body just got used to breathing through my nose. And so I found that one to be very helpful, at least for my wife. And I probably, if I'm not snoring, probably sleeping better myself too.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So mouth tape, I'm a believer. How about Ambien?
Yeah, so any of the kind of prescription sleep aids, Ambien, Lunesta, Sonata, they all affect REM sleep. And they've known this for years, and it came out that they do affect REM sleep.
Negatively, meaning you get less of it.
Less REM sleep, yeah. And so that can affect memory. Like we talked about, there's a big memory component in that segment. And there's studies showing that long-term use of some of these can lead to memory issues. They also found that there was a decrease in REM sleep with Benadryl PM and Tylenol PM, which they didn't know before. But those two also tend to have some of the same effects. So we'd say, whoa on that. Again, certain circumstances, if somebody's gone, 5 days without sleeping and they're kind of getting into a stage where they're not good, maybe that would be a time for that. But generally, with few exceptions, we'd say whoa or no.
So for people, and maybe we'll go through this list and then come back to those things, because I think maybe benzos like Restoril probably falls in the same category.
Same.
Is there anything different on that that's worth mentioning?
No, in particular, those can affect that REM sleep.
Again, REM sleep.
REM sleep. Alcohol would affect that REM sleep as well.
So even though alcohol, people might say, hey, this helps me fall asleep because it calms me down, it's compromising the quality of your sleep.
Yep. It's a sedative, so it helps you fall asleep, but long-term overall, your sleep quality is much, much diminished. Especially
and I know that we try to do like a myth busting, conversation on this. That was one of the questions I had here, but we'll just address it now. That this idea of a little nightcap, a glass of wine or whatever that helps me sleep better. Maybe a falsehood, a myth that is not true. Maybe help you fall asleep, but not improve the quality or duration of your sleep.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a net negative.
Net negative. Yeah. Don't do it. Okay. How about CPAP machines?
Yeah. So if somebody has any sort of obstructive sleep apnea, if they've got any sort of breathing issues and they use a CPAP, super helpful.
Game changer for some people.
Game changer, yeah. When you don't get enough oxygen for multiple nights in a row, multiple weeks in a row, multiple years in a row, brain doesn't do so well.
When would somebody know that they ought to consider something like a CPAP machine? Because it seems like it's like last measure. I'm going to put this mask on my face and just the inconvenience of it. It seems like the last measure somebody would want to take, but when should somebody say, maybe I'm a good candidate for that?
So we know from the research about 90% of everybody who uses a CPAP is overweight or obese. And so it's the biggest risk factor overall. Part of that is because you gain weight in your tongue. It's one of the first places that you gain weight. And then the lumen, the space where the air comes through is going to be decreased in terms of breathing. So we would say if you're overweight or obese, that would be one of the times to, hey, I'm going to get checked for. If you snore, that's another thing, right? Some people have obstructive sleep apnea just from, they got big tonsils and big adenoids and they're just, it's how their body is designed, right? Some people, it's the position they sleep in that can cause it. So ideally, for most things, sleeping on your back is the best. There's an exception. If you have sleep apnea, a lot of times sleeping on your side is more effective. With that said, if you have a CPAP, you're usually on your back, unless you're using one of the newer devices where you can sleep on your side. But try not to sleep on your stomach. That can cause all sorts of problems, and that by itself can cause problems.
For everybody.
Stomach
sleeping is not ideal.
Mechanically, musculoskeletally, right? Your body doesn't do well with that. But also, when your head's cricked to one way or the other way for long periods of time,
probably on a pillow,
not good for overall health.
Yeah.
So, but also can increase your rates for sleep apnea. But generally, side sleeping is going to be the best if you have some sort of sleep apnea.
Okay.
And then if you're using a CPAP, you got to be on your back.
What would you recommend if somebody came in and they say, I'm not sleeping well, I'm snoring? Like, what is the sequence of things you would recommend that they try before they get to the more, intrusive of these things like a CPAP machine? Yeah.
So weight loss. So that's a combination of exercise and nutrition. That's a combination of improving your sleep quality, right? If I'm sleeping better, I'm craving sugar less, I'm exercising more energy exercise, all those things. So, focus on your breathing. So we know when somebody's focused on their breathing, it helps calm them down, lowers cortisol, increases growth hormone and testosterone. So this kind of multifactorial, I'm going to focus on my sleep, and my exercise, and my nutrition.
They all go hand in hand. You can't optimize one without addressing all of them.
That's where I'd start. In addition to that, you can get it in with an ENT and just see, hey, do I have anything going on? Nutrition-wise, an anti-inflammatory diet. So a lot of times ENTs will see, there's a lot of inflammation. Where does that come from? Too much sugar, too much dairy, too much inflammatory foods, fried foods, sodas, all that stuff.
Interesting. We'll come back to food in a second because I want to talk more about that and the relationship between what and when we eat and how it impacts our sleep. But let's continue down this list. How about nasal strips? Is that something that works for people?
Really good. So it can open up the nasal passages. You get a little bit more oxygen to your body, and sometimes it can be significant, 50% improvement in oxygen to your body. So it works better for certain people than other people. So I would try it. Sometimes people do mouth tape, sometimes they'll do nasal strips, sometimes both.
You could both. I've never thought of that. That's interesting.
You can kind of get it from both ends.
Yeah, that's interesting. How about eye masks? Blocking out light.
Super helpful, especially if your room is kind of lit. So depending on where your bedroom faces, if you get the early morning sun, that can wake you up really easy. So if you're, kind of east facing, definitely an eye mask. Or if you just have a lot of lights in your room, ideally one of the keys for sleep is avoiding those lights at night.
How important is that though? So I'm thinking of, if you've got a computer plugged in the corner, or if you've got like a little light that's on a power outlet or something like that. How much does that impact your sleep?
If you can see it, it's going to impact it somewhat,
Hmm.
right? If you're laying down, you're like, oh, I can see that, it's going to affect it. Now, again, when your eyes are shut, yes, but it's still going to impact it a little bit. I wouldn't say hugely, but you're going to get an impact. The bigger ones I see is when the light's coming in, and again, depending on
From
what time of
outside.
year, that can really wake you up. Or if there's cars that are on your street that their lights shine into your bedroom, that can really wake you up.
Yeah. Okay. How about last one? People use white noise, like noisemakers all the time.
Totally
Is
fine.
that no issue?
White noise, gray noise, just anything that's just kind of without words, without an upbeat tempo, totally fine. And that's what we would go to sleep with for, lots of years, right? Thousands of years, kind of that noise of the ocean or
Yeah.
a river or a brook or something, just kind of the wind going through the trees.
Is there I know some people use different frequencies, like where you kind of hear a little subtle pulsing. Is there any good data there that supports that helping sleep?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything directly with that. I do know that if it's too stimulating, whether it's the volume, whether it's the hertz, that can keep you awake. So you want something just soothing, something you would listen to if you were trying to relax.
Okay, so we've talked about some of these common sleep aids, maybe just other, like you mentioned, 7 hygiene factors earlier. I'd love to think through just good sleep hygiene. What are the things we should be doing to optimize sleep? Normal person, not having necessarily sleep problems, but I just want to get the most out of my sleep. Maybe just talk to us about ideal sleep hygiene.
Yeah, so we call these the big rocks. So for years I presented with Stephen Covey, and he would always talk about the big rocks, like the key things, if you will, the fundamentals, and these would be the 7 key rocks. So number 1 is you want to go to bed by 10:30, and that's 10:30 p.m., not 10:30 a.m. So dang it, I thought I had it nailed, right? If you stay awake later than 10:30, you get that second wind, makes it harder to fall asleep. Number 2 is you want to have a routine. So same place, same time, same, right? So if one night you fall asleep on your couch, one night you're in your bed, one night you're on the floor, your body doesn't know whether it's coming or going. Within 10 minutes of the same time every night. So if you say, I'm going to go to bed at 10 p.m., you can go to bed as early as 9:50 or as late as 10:10, right? It's Pavlov's law. You're preparing your body for what's to come. So that's the routine. Number 3 is keep your room cool, dark, and quiet. Cool is actually pretty cool. 60 to 67 degrees, preferably 60 to 65 degrees. So cool goes with sleep. Heat goes with awake. It gets cooler at night than it does during the day. Yeah. Cool goes with sleep. Heat goes with awake. Dark, that requires blackout shades or mask. You just want to avoid the lights coming in. And then quiet. That requires earplugs sometimes if somebody's spouse or partner snores. So cool, dark, and quiet. Again, that speaks to the environment that you're in. Number 4 is you want to exercise daily. So when you exercise, like we talked about, you break down ATP into ADP. That adenosine goes into melatonin, which helps you sleep. Then you want to avoid stimulants, coffee, tea, excessive sugar, caffeine, nicotine. Those are all stimulants that will keep you awake and then affect your sleep quality. It will either affect you falling asleep or staying asleep. So sometimes people say, oh, I had that Monster, Red Bull, whatever, and I fell right asleep. Okay, but when did you wake up? Well, 4:30 in the morning, right? So avoid that. I say some people don't sleep at night because they have monsters under their bed. The monster drink. Yeah. So avoid those stimulants. Also stressful conversations. So, we've all had those stressful conversations at night with somebody and we're like, now I'm not sleeping tonight, So if you're going to have a stressful conversation with somebody, or if you have to have a stressful conversation, try to have it before noon. Before 12,
interesting.
Right. Even with caffeine, if you're going to have it because whatever, then you'd have it in the morning early. People always say, well, the half-life 6 to 8 hours. So 6 to 8 hours is later, half it's out, and then 6 to 8 hours, the next half is out. but that's a misunderstanding of the half-life. So 6 to 8 hours after half of it is out. Whatever's left, half of that is out after 6 to 8 hours. Whatever's half left, 6 to 8 hours after that, what is
It's
it?
like how carbon dating works. Yeah.
Carbon dating, same thing. So you're looking at like 4 to 6 half-lives, sometimes even longer if you're older, before it's completely out of your body. So it'll be in your body for more than 24 hours. So it affects our sleep architecture or quality of sleep or quantity, either one or both.
Regardless of whether we're having it at 9 a.m. or 1 p.m.
You got it.
To some extent, it's going to impact our sleep.
Right. And again, the earlier the better because of the half-life, but still going to have some issues. And especially if people have a sensitivity to it, so many people have sensitivities to caffeine and they try to blunt it or they take a downer, right? So they say, I can't sleep at night, so I take Ambien. And then I take, a caffeinated beverage to get me up in the morning and then
artificially stimulate the behaviors they want rather than,
So the next two of the most important, you want to avoid eating 3 hours before you go to bed.
Okay.
So normally you eat, gives you energy, and then you do something. In this case, you eat, gives you energy. I can't sleep. So ideally, not eating 3 hours before you go to bed. Now, if you say, hey, I don't get home till whatever, and it's only an hour and a half, well, that's better than 5 minutes before you go to bed. So,
right.
Yeah. Lastly, avoid the bright lights 3 hours before you go to bed. So that's TV, phones, tablets, computers, anything like that. That's flickering lights can stimulate cortisol, keep you awake. And so we want to avoid the bright lights.
And even choosing lights in your home, where you can, in the evening hours, turn on your lamps that have the warm lights rather than the blue lights and the daytime lights. And being intentional about how you're doing your daytime versus evening lighting in your home matters.
For sure. So the what we call the old school incandescent light bulbs, the yellow light bulbs, the warmer light as opposed to the daylight light, that's going to be a lot better.
Back to the blue light.
Back to the blue light. Yeah. So these LEDs that we have nowadays, again, they're more blue light. We want more of the old school yellow light. And then if you can light rooms that you're going to be in with a low lit candle or the lights, right? That's the way to go. So people say, well, should I convert my kitchen over to the, kind of the yellowish light? No, because you shouldn't be in your kitchen 3 hours before you go to bed. So you can just avoid that location altogether, right? You'd have that in your study, in your bedroom, in your areas that you're going to be before you go to bed.
And what we've tried to do is all of our ceiling lights, we've got those daytime lights. And then we've got a switch that powers all of our lamps. And we've got lamps in every room, right? That's the warm light. So in the evening, we can have that lower intensity, but also the different color. We've got that warm light versus the warm bulbs versus the blue or daytime bulbs.
And if you've been in somebody's house, we do the same thing. If you've been in somebody's house who does that, it feels good at night.
It does feel good. It feels relaxing. Yeah.
So if you can light those rooms with a low lit lamp, right? The other benefits to the lamp is it's not shining directly in your eyes, right? Whereas the overhead light, it's hitting your eyes directly. So, same thing if, some people read at night. So I would say if you're going to read at night, have a lamp and then that lamp is shining on your reading material, or you can have a lamp shining behind you on your reading material, like a direct light, but try not to have overhead light hitting you in the eyes.
So let's go back to, so those are good sleep hygiene factors. Let's go to, you made some comments about what you eat, not eating 3 hours before you go to bed. How about like different macros and things? Like, does it matter when you eat certain things? Are there certain things that maybe you should have more of at dinner that would help you sleep better versus what you should have during lunch and breakfast?
Yeah, great question. So a couple things. So a little bit higher protein, probably a little bit higher fat work better later at night. Both those kind of help feed into the relaxation response, this kind of relaxing. Carbohydrates are more giving you energy, more stimulating, which is great at, 8 a.m. or noon, and not so great at, 6 at night or 5:30 at night or 7 at night, whenever you're having that last meal. So I would say ideally shifting to a little bit higher protein and a little bit higher fat in the evening. Again, not a lot. And the biggest thing is make sure you're avoiding any of the stimulants there. So people say, well, what if I had a dessert there? You're like, that's going to be stimulating, right? What if I have, caffeine? Definitely not,
Right.
So try to avoid anything that's really stimulating. And sometimes that's even, things you wouldn't think about, right? So somebody will say, hey, I'm going to watch it, not as it relates to food, but I'm going to watch my favorite show right before I go to bed. Well, that might keep you awake because the flickering lights stimulate the cortisol, and then it's exciting in and of itself. So watching that, foods that are laden with a lot of junk fat. So your popcorn that you just get out of the bag. Yeah. And you're doing that. That can be stimulating. Anything with MSG, monosodium glutamate, right? That's a neurostimulant. So that's in a lot of times your different processed foods, your pretzels and snacks and things like that. That will keep you awake as well.
What about, I've heard things that I have no idea if they're true. For example, kiwi. I've heard there are certain fruits and other things that actually can be good sleep aids if you have them before a couple hours before bed. Are you aware of anything like that?
Yes, pistachios tend to be the best. So pistachios, almonds, any of the nuts, but especially pistachios, 1 to 2 pistachios, even up to 6 pistachios before you go to bed. Now, again, respecting that time frame, a couple, 2-3 hours before you go to bed can actually help with melatonin production, but it's a natural melatonin. It doesn't work the way that the exogenous, supplements work, and it helps your body sleep better. There are some foods showing that, anything that has, vitamin C might help with sleep. So there's a pathway there. So vitamin C foods, right? So apples and oranges and kiwis to that point.
So pistachios, have a stash of pistachios.
Pistachios.
If you're looking for dessert, just have a handful of pistachios. If you're going to have ice cream, at least put pistachios on it.
There we go. Pistachio ice cream.
There we go. Okay. How about, we've talked about exercise and sleep, the timing of it. We've talked about different nutrition habits. What about, are there other supplements? So if people that we didn't talk about before, we talked about some common sleep aids people try to use, but are there other natural things that you're aware of that are fall into maybe the more supplement category? Vitamins, minerals, magnesium ones that we'll hear a lot about that people should think about if they're having a hard time sleeping?
Yeah. So magnesium tends to be the go-to in terms of sleep. And there's a lot of research on this. So magnesium before you go to bed, and any variety really, will help with sleep.
So of all the different types of magnesium, all of them carry benefits for sleep.
Yeah, it's the element that really matters. There's, you got your magnesium threonate, you've got your magnesium citrate, they're all good. Potentially maybe threonate might help a little bit more with sleep, but just magnesium is going to help. Potassium, right? This helps. Calcium. So kind of the same thing that helps with muscle cramps can also help with sleeping. So some people say, I drink some warm milk before I go to bed. Yeah, you're probably getting the calcium benefit from that. It's helping with sleep. But again, just the timing, we don't want to do it too close to when we go to bed. Things like a warm blanket or a weighted blanket or a rice pack that you put in the microwave and then you put on your body, warming up your feet can sometimes help, because then there's the cool down effect after. Or sometimes, people say I have a special blanket that I sleep with, and that's kind of relaxing. Sometimes people do things that are what we call mindless, right? Maybe just some gentle movements that can help. Anything that just kind of calm down the body. So we're trying to go into this relaxation response in this phase. So nothing stimulating.
So, but there are some things that if people are persistently struggling with sleep, that there's some behavioral things that we've talked about that are maybe fall into the sleep hygiene discussion with routine and exercise and when you should do certain things. But there might be some supplemental things, magnesium, calcium, potassium, that you could consider.
Absolutely. And you can look at maybe ashwagandha. It's an adaptogen, right? So it can kind of go wherever it's needed. And one thing is that there is some research showing it might help with sleep, right? So we might have a sleep benefit there. Anything like just even hydration, right? If you're dehydrated, every hormone's made from water.
Right.
So if you're dehydrated, right, boom, electrolytes. A little bit of salt. And that can help with multiple things. So that salt will actually help with sleep. But also a little bit of salt with that last drink of water at night makes it so your body retains it as opposed to going into your bladder and waking you up a few hours later. So all of a sudden I don't have to get up 3 or 4 times a night to go to the bathroom. So it can be helpful for that. but I would say, the pistachios tend to still win for this sleep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It seems to me that most of us are, and we've learned a lot about this going into this in this Core 7 project, right? Where we've been thinking about different supplementation and how do we find the right sources and amounts to give people fill the gaps that they're not getting through food. And I'm just learning more and more of us just are not getting the recommended amounts of some basic things like magnesium and potassium and you name it. And I just have to wonder if our diets were complete and perfect, if we would not need some of these sleep aids, if we would just naturally be able to sleep deeper, sleep more efficiently, and have some of the challenges that we do.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. And, I'll bring up one other point on the nutrition real quick is, herbal supplements,
Yeah.
like even not even a supplement, but
Like an herbal tea.
herbal tea. So your chamomile tea, your hibiscus, evening primrose, any of those that can help with sleep. Other supplements, 5-HTP can help with sleep, GABA, again, the valerian root we talked about. So there's a nutritional strategy there too. But eating whole foods and sensible combinations, having the right microbiome, right? Because you are eating healthy regularly helps with serotonin and its kind of twin sister melatonin, right? So these are created at night when you sleep with the food you eat, with water, exercise increase the amount you produce them. So they're all related to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. We have learned about a bunch of these probiotic strains. One of them is a GABA probiotic that does have really good clinicals about impact on sleep, favorably. So yeah, thinking about the gut microbiome and these different things, I wanted to bring that up because I feel like the more tools we can help people have in their toolkit, to think about, well, this isn't working for me. I'm trying the mouth taping thing, or I'm trying to put the sleep mask on and it's uncomfortable and it falls off and it gets twisted. The more of these ideas we can give them or share with them, the better they're able to navigate what works for them to really optimize their sleep is what I hope anyway, coming out of this conversation, one of the things. Okay. So how about, immunity? You go into flu season, colds. What impact does sleep have on immunity?
So especially in that N3 sleep, that deep sleep,
Yeah.
delta slow wave sleep, that's when our natural killer cells are, kind of the protectors for getting sick are increased. So anytime we can get good quality sleep, again, our immune system's just bolstered. Again, we talked about the study with COVID. It's huge. So if we could just get a little bit better sleep, again, less likely to get sick, less likely to end up, especially, during COVID in the ER, right?
Right.
So
going into flu season, cold season, sleep is a strategy to try to optimize your immunity and your kids' immunity as you navigate that.
big time. And again, even at the highest level, I keep coming back to this. If there was a 23% reduction in people who are in close contact with individuals with COVID, I mean, it would probably be 50 or 60 or 70% increase just with casual exposure, just out there, out and about with people. I mean, it's significant. And that was just with 1 hour, let alone if we get an hour and a half or 2 hours, right? So anything we can do to increase our quality and quantity of sleep. I mean, we take blood pressure, cholesterol, mood, energy, libido, the list goes
All of
on
the
and
above.
on. Like
It's like this nascent or innate superpower that we just need to unlock to help us function the way we're supposed to function. Okay, so let's do just a couple more questions, but I would love to do a couple of these myth busting questions. We've talked about a couple of them already, but true or false, if you can't fall asleep, the best thing to do is just to stay in bed and just keep trying.
Yeah, no, that's not good. So if you're in bed for more than about 15 minutes, up to 20 minutes, you should probably get out of bed. Part of that is the Pavlov's law. You're training your body to stay awake in bed. So you get out of bed, and what you can do is don't watch TV. Don't go read something that's stimulating. Again, you want to read the repair manual for your, maybe even your bicycle or something, right? But you don't want to do anything stimulating. Or you can get out of bed and do some deep breathing for a few minutes and then hop back in bed. But you don't want to just lay awake in your bed awake. That's not going to help you.
That's my strategy is usually I'll just go lay on the couch. I'll turn on one of those kind of very subtle lamps and have a book. And it's never like a fiction. It's always like a nonfiction book where I'm trying to learn something. And for whatever reason, that does the trick for me.
Yep.
Then I go back upstairs once I start to fall asleep while I'm reading, go back and get in bed, and seems to do the job.
That would work. Yep.
Okay. How about snooze button in the morning? So, I feel like I didn't get enough sleep. So I'm going to hit the snooze button, get 10 more minutes. Does that improve or give you any more rest than if you just get up?
No, it's better just to get up. So instead of hitting the snooze, just get up. In fact, we'll have people, if they, still use an alarm clock, put it on the other side of the room. So when it goes off, they have to get up. Now it's not like, oh, I'm going to go back to bed. It's like, I'm already up. So snoozing is not a great idea.
That extra 10 minutes after you've already kind of woken yourself up, it's not giving you really a lot more rest. And I've actually read that it can increase the grogginess and other things if you just keep trying to hit snooze, but you're not really sleeping.
That's exactly it. So get up when your alarm goes off.
Have you had any clients that you've worked with where you've noticed sleep make a huge difference in their life, whether it's trying to recover from something physically or dealing with a mental challenge, but any story that you can share with us, just helping people visualize practical application of this and see that it really works?
Yeah, I thought of two right off the top of my head when you said that. I had a family I'd worked with for a long period of time, and they said, we've got a daughter who's struggling with some anxiety and depression. We're thinking about hopping on our private jet. We're flying out to Washington, D.C. They're going to laser the brain. It's experimental, very high risk, very expensive, might change her personality, but we're thinking about doing it. And I was like, well, how's her sleep? Well, it's horrible. But anyway, we're thinking about lasering her brain. I'm like, before you laser her brain, you might try sleep. It's been around for thousands of years. It's free. And lo and behold, we get her to sleep and they're like, her anxiety's gone. It's like, yeah, right. But people think, well, that can't work because that's free, and really it works better. As the former Harvard trained CEO of IHC said, the cheaper and simpler the intervention, the better it works.
Interesting.
So it doesn't cost $100,000. It doesn't ruin your personality and it works better. So that was one. I had an individual come in from out of state who had some issues with sleep, but I asked her, I said, so tell me what goes on. And she said, well, I have some heart palpitations at night. And so she said, like, so what was happening? I'll preface it. She was eating late at night.
Oh,
she didn't go to bed early, but she ate late as well. So I said, well, what time do you finish your last meal? She said 8 p.m. I said, what time do you go to bed? 8:10 p.m. So she would eat and then she'd go to bed. Well, it caused acid reflux. Well, acid reflux can feel like organs, that somatovisceral, visceral somato response, right? Where the organ feels like the muscle. So she thought she was having a heart issue. So then she's like, well, I didn't want to have a heart attack. So I took aspirin, and she would take 3 aspirin, but the large ones, not the small ones, not the baby aspirin, not the 81 milligrams. She's taking almost 1,000 milligrams of aspirin. So she took that. Well, then that caused ulcers. And then she had ulcers. So then she would have to take these PPIs, these protein pump inhibitors. And so because she ate late at night, it caused all these other effects. So we had her stop eating late at night. So then she didn't feel like she was having heart issues. So then she didn't take the aspirin. So then she didn't have ulcers. And then, so just from one thing, it led to multiple things.
When how many of us have some version of that story, whether it's, I'm struggling sleeping. And so I get my phone out and then I'm on my phone and then that keeps me up further. And so then I take a medication that has these other consequences. And how many of us would benefit, by trying to get to the root cause of just of the sleep problem with basic sleep hygiene, like you've laid out in this conversation, and avoid the cascading effect of some harmful behaviors that really impact us in mental health and physical health in some pretty real ways. That's a really good story, both of those. So, 2 questions. One is parting advice. People listen to this, they hear all this stuff. They're maybe not sleeping as well as they would like. Just synthesizing this whole conversation into one last parting piece of wisdom of what you want people to know, what would benefit people as they're listening to this and they want to act on something.
So I would take of the 7 key habits: bed by 10:30, routine, cool, dark, and quiet, avoid stimulants, exercise daily, avoid eating 3 hours before you go to bed, and avoid bright lights 3 hours before you go to bed. Pick 1 or 2 of those to start working on, because you already might have 1 or 2 of them dialed in. Okay, great. So pick another 1 or 2 and work on that for a couple weeks and get that to be natural, automatic, autonomic, a habit. And then pick another 1, and then pick another. And pretty soon you can dial in all 7. But just pick 1 or 2 at a time. I would say if you're looking at like large value, high return, the bright lights 3 hours before you go to bed, the 10:30 sleep time, the stimulants, those are 3 big ones. So you can start there, and then maybe don't eat 3 hours before you go to bed. Those, start with maybe one of those, but any of them are going to yield significant results.
So don't be overwhelmed by feeling like you have to master all of this and completely change your routine, but start with maybe some of those big ones and then ease your way into sequentially trying to master all 7.
Baby steps.
I love it. How, Mark, if people listen to this and they say, man, that guy is amazing. I've got this challenge with my shoulder or my knee, or I'm not sleeping, or I've got whatever. How do people find you and engage with you?
Great question. So we don't have a website, but just word of mouth. So we've been fortunate. You can email me, actually, if you want, if you're an emailer. It's Optimum Fitness. That's OPTIMUMFITNESS at MSN.com. So
he's amazing. If you do have things you need help with, and I know you're incredibly busy, so it's not like you've got oodles of open time in your schedule, but so grateful for you and the ways you've helped my family, and the conversation, the knowledge you've been able to share here, the knowledge you've shared with people that we have tried to help at Ampelis. And you're just a wonderful friend, wonderful resource. Super grateful for you. And hopefully this conversation today at least gives you some thoughts and ideas and maybe some tools you can use to unlock some of these innate abilities you have for health through sleep. So we hope you join us for more conversations. We'll have more. If you have questions specific to this topic, feel free to DM us on social media. We'll try to get back to you with information and responses, and love to do what we can to help you. So thanks for listening, and please join us again for another episode of Core Conversations.
Good morning. For the first day in a long time, don't feel like watching from the sidelines. Yeah, I'm waking with the sunrise, get a taste of the daylight. This time I'ma live it up, sing it out at the top of my lungs.